All right, so let's begin. My name is Camille. I've been working here at Shonnard's for about 2 years now, and I got into beekeeping with my predecessor, Fred Selby. So he's a commercial beekeeper. He's been doing it basically his entire life. And I learned everything that I know for my base from him. So you can thank Fred Selby as well. I have 6 hives on site here at Shonnard's. I usually have 2 hives at my personal house as well. Just a little background on me there. So this is a longer slide, so I'm just going to give a quick overview here. We have the benefits of beekeeping, just a couple things to maybe incentivize those of you who want to get into beekeeping but want to know exactly why you would be doing that, other than maybe things you've already been thinking about. A brief history of beekeeping, and I'm going to try not to bore anybody here, but there are some points in history that are still very relevant today and could actually influence your choices in beekeeping today. Why bees are in trouble, how you can help. We're going to be talking a little bit about commercial beekeeping here and what it's doing to bee populations, native bee populations as well. Hive composition, placement, and terminology. If you're brand new, we're going to go over everything. We're going to go over what is a Langstroth hive, what are the boxes, what are the frames, how you put those things together, and so on and so forth. Because this is a larger topic, we're talking about everything in the hive setup. I've separated the hive boxes and the frames into 2 separate sections here. Beekeeping equipment, that includes your smokers, your hive tools, your frame grips, things like that, that can be really useful while you're out in the bee yard. The social organization of bees, we're just going to be talking about male bees, female bees, kind of what tasks they have in the bee yard. Bee breeds. If you haven't ordered your bees yet, we'll talk about different types of bees here. Procuring bees, we offer packages and nucleus hives here at Shonnard's, and we'll also briefly go over swarm capture, which is a free way of getting your bees. And then additional resources, I have some really excellent books that I could recommend and some really good websites as well. Benefits of beekeeping. So everyone knows we need bees and other pollinating insects for pollinations of fruits and vegetables that we eat in our everyday diet, particularly those that are monocropped. Honeybees are really great for pollinating them. Native bees need a wide variety of plants. So if you like almonds, honeybees are basically the only reason we have almonds so widely available. They're great for fruit trees. They're great for strawberries. They're basically great for any type of food that's on your table. Obvious reason for getting into beekeeping, honey. Honey can be used in a variety of ways. You can use it in mead. You can use it in June. June is like a kombucha, but instead of sugar, you're using honey. Gives it a little bit different body. Local honey can help with allergies. I've heard lots of accounts where people swear by it. I don't have the science to back it up, but it's a widely accepted thing. It's also a great topical for burns, cuts, and some beekeepers even use it for bee stings. It covers your wound, it prevents it from hurting as much, and it stops different pathogens and things from getting into the cut. Wax has an incredible amount of uses, and I'm probably not going to get too much into this today because it's just, you can really go down the rabbit hole here. But a couple things you can use wax for, though, is you can use it as a furniture finish. You can use it for seals on your envelopes, your candles. You can use it for chapstick, lotions, all sorts of things. And it smells wonderful, too, so it makes really nice candles. For those of you who are new, you might not know what propolis is. Propolis is bee glue. Essentially, it is what the bees use to patch any holes in their colony. They use it for essentially making the beekeeper's life a nightmare and gluing everything shut. So that's part of the reason why you really need your hive tool with you to separate that bee glue. It's kind of hard to see but I'm going to see if I can show you a little block of propolis that I have right here. As you can see, there's lots of different colors in it. There's some layers. It's cold enough right now to be a solid, but when it's really hot out, it's more of a really sticky liquid. So getting into your hive when it's cold versus warm is going to be a very different experience. It's also very medicinal. A lot of people use it as like a chew for toothaches. They'll use it on Band-Aids and things like that. It's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, all sorts of interesting things. Don't think there's been too much research on this specifically, but just like the honey, it has a great following of people who really stand by it. So that's something else that's interesting that you could harvest. A brief history of beekeeping. Again, I've tried to keep this incredibly brief, so I'm not boring anybody here. But I'm going to start in the very, very beginning. We don't know exactly how long the relationship has been going on between humans and beekeepers, but the earliest records that we have occur probably somewhere between 8,000 and 6,000 BC in these early rock paintings you see on the side of the slide here. Admitting a couple of extra people in here real fast. So the earliest actual apiary, this is not counting your foragers, your scavengers, this is actual animal husbandry. Bees that have been taken into society is probably between 970 and 930 BC in Tel Rehov, Israel. It's kind of difficult to tell how many cylindrical hives are in this area because they're made of sun-dried mud. A lot of them are covered up, but there's between 75 and 200 cylindrical hives in this apiary. So kind of cool to know how far it goes back. An interesting thing to note is that beehives were made with the most abundant and the cheapest materials per region. Gums, which are hollowed out trees, have been moved into society, and because they have drawn comb, they have wax, they have bits of honey and things, even if the bees die out there, they're going to be likely to have new swarms in following seasons because the smells and the pre-drawn comb really draws the bees in. Sun-dried mud, fired clay, even reed baskets insulated with mud, dung, whatever's handy at the time. The bees need a dark enclosed space that has some insulation. They need plenty of space for their comb, and they'll basically live anywhere you put them. So throughout the centuries, bees have been used as a direct resource, which is obvious, for honey, for propolis, for wax, even for the larva. The larva is a good source of protein, and they have been eaten. Pollination warfare is kind of an interesting one. Not many people think about beekeeping for warfare. Skep booby traps in England are kind of an interesting thing. Right next to your stone walls, you would have multiple indentations where you would keep your bees, and that would be a normal bee yard during peace times. But if an enemy were to break through your gate, they would all be hooked up so that the hives would all collapse when the invaders came in, and they would be attacked. And well, that slows people down when you've got a couple 100,000 bees all stinging you at the same time. Rhododendron honey is very poisonous in dense quantities. I wouldn't worry about it around here necessarily because there's so much variety. But along the Black Sea, rhododendrons grow so densely that the rhododendron honey can be poisonous, and it has been used to actually repel invading troops through a false sense of security. All right, now we're moving up way up into the 1800s with our last point here. Movable frames have been experimented with in many years. L.L. Langstroth is not the first one in his field, but he is possibly the most notable, at least in the United States here. He patented his movable frame hive with regards to bee space, which we'll get into later, in 1852. And the Langstroth hive is now the most widely used hive configuration out of any other hive today. So where can bees be found? You can find them in nature. When you find them in gums or hollowed out trees, it's almost always going to be live trees. They don't necessarily, they're not attracted to dead trees so much. So if you see a knot in a tree with bees coming out, then there could be a beehive in there. If you see a scar in a tree, that's a good spot for them also. This middle photo is not the best place for them. Usually when you see this, there's been a swarm and they have failed to find a good place to live. So they've just built their comb right where the swarm is. Unfortunately, this isn't sustainable and they're very unlikely to survive the winter in this location. The best case scenario for these bees here is to have a friendly beekeeper pop in and have them rehomed. Pretty commonly, I think most of you are probably backyard beekeepers. Is my audio working properly?
Working fine here.
Okay. Maybe try leaving and returning, and I can admit you back. And if for some reason you can't hear still, I will be posting this on YouTube and the audio is working for most, it seems. Sorry about that. We were talking about bees in the backyard. I'm assuming most of you in this class today are backyard beekeepers, so this is where we're going to be focusing on mostly today. Backyard beekeepers typically have anywhere between 1 and probably 15 hives. The maintenance difference between 1 and 3 hives is pretty minimal, so it's a good idea to have a couple hives on site if you have the resources to do so. It also really helps if you have a weaker hive and a stronger hive, you can swap some resources around and level it out. Commercial operations. Not too many people really know too much about this, but this is an area where most of your packages and your nukes are going to come from. The commercial beekeepers are essentially fueling the backyard beekeepers by having the production of so many hives. There are definitely problems with commercial beekeeping. You're having hives coming from all over the United States to pollinate almonds in California within a 2-week period. So if you have a disease in New York or a disease in Utah, they're all coming to California all at the same time. And that's going to really spread all sorts of diseases and mites and things like that, which is why things like varroa mites are such a problem right now. As you can see in the picture on the left here, you have each pallet with 6 bee boxes on it. So they're in close proximity. They don't have any distinguishing marks. They're all colored the same. You're going to have some drift between hives where workers are going to return to the incorrect hive and they're going to give whatever they happen to have to their neighbors. That being said, it's unlikely you'd have any kind of good availability on nucleus hives and packages without your commercial beekeepers, and you wouldn't have almonds and things like that either. So it's kind of a give and a take. I think we discussed most of this slide over the previous 3. The nature of the foraging habits does make bees susceptible to pesticides. Pesticides are typically sprayed. If flowers are open, bees are going to visit those flowers. They will take the pesticides back to the hive and then they share it with everybody else. Fortunately, it's not all that common to have pesticide deaths in our area, but it's definitely worth talking to your neighbors. If you are in a rural area, you've got maybe some orchards or some vineyards or something around you to see who's spraying and when and what their spraying habits are. Commercial pollination can speed the spread of pests and diseases. We went over that briefly in the last slide. Urbanization and changes to agriculture is leading to a loss of habitat, particularly for native bees. Native bees aren't really that interested in harvesting a specific flower over and over and over again, whereas the honeybees will stick to, say, apple flowers, and they'll harvest apple flowers all day. Most native bees are going to harvest in an area versus a specific species, which is why urban areas are actually decent these days in Corvallis, especially with everyone with their native gardens and everything. The more native plants you can plant, the more variety of plants you can plant, the better off all of your native bees and your honeybees are going to be. Colony collapse disorder. This isn't necessarily one entity. This is something that occurs with multiple factors. About 30 to 50% losses are common due to colony collapse or some variation of it. This is both backyard beekeeping and commercial beekeeping. So the odds are not in your favor. So the more you can learn, the better practices you can exhibit, the better off you'll be. But there's still a factor of bees in your area that may give you disease or mites. There's the seasonality, maybe the fires from years previous have prevented your bees from foraging. There's all sorts of factors that go into this. False springs are also a danger here. Poor forage over in the corner. If you have everything begin to bloom in spring, you have a big cold snap like we're having right now. Luckily, I think we're early enough. We're kind of out of, we're not in danger too much here. But a false spring event can really destroy a bee's forage and can contribute to colony collapse as well. Responsible beekeeping. So this is something that's definitely learned over time. The longer you're in backyard beekeeping, commercial beekeeping, whatever trade you're in with apiculture, the better off you'll be, the more you'll know. You can't learn it in a day. You can pore over books all day long and you still won't even scratch the iceberg. A strong foundation of knowledge and skills comes from talking to other beekeepers. It comes from actually experiencing. It comes from doing your biweekly hive inspections consistently. So the more you're in your hive, the more you're talking to your peers, the better off you'll be and the better off your bees and your community will be. How and when to begin. If you haven't gotten your bees yet, now is a wonderful time to make sure all of your equipment is built and painted. You've got your location set up. Maybe do a little bit of research on which breed of bee you would like. Where can we find local communities and mentors? That's an excellent question, Lily. Let me post a couple things in the chat window here. I'm not seeing it, so I will post it at the end of class, I promise. I'm also going to post it at the description portion of the video on YouTube. But there are certain things that can definitely help you. I know OSU has a master beekeeper extension service, so you can get a mentor through OSU. You can also join your community beekeeping clubs like Linn Benton Beekeeping Association. I'm a member there, and there's a lot of really experienced, really friendly people there. They also have amazing speakers. You'll find people like Dewey Caron and really, really influential beekeepers showing up there just about every month. So this part is very, very important. Before you build your beehive, before you choose what setup you're going to go with, consider what we talked about in the brief history. Bees will live in just about anything, so it's important that you get the equipment that's going to work with you. Typically speaking, I do 8 frame and 10 frame Langstroth hives. The difference is the size and the weight. The weight is the big thing here. If you have back problems, if you can't lift 80, 90 pounds at a time, maybe go with a smaller hive setup. And if you're more willing to get into the hive, to actually work the hive, your bees are going to thank you for it. They'll live in anything. They want you to have something that's convenient for you so that you can take care of them. It's difficult to change your setup once you started. So make sure that you have experimented a little bit, you've lifted some boxes, you kind of get a feel for what you really want in your apiary. Removable frame hive types. So we're just going to briefly go over what types of hives are out there, what's available. If you're a woodworker, you can definitely make your own bee boxes. Take a look at some measurements because the measurements are very precise, especially for the Langstroth hive. Talking about bee space, which is 3/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch is the area where bees will not necessarily produce burr comb. So if you've got a space, they're not going to produce burr comb there. You can easily remove your frames versus having them glued to the sides of the box. Langstroth hives are what we're going to be discussing today because that's where my area of expertise lies. And it's what we also sell here at the store. 8 and 10 frame sizes. The hives are both the same depth. They're the same, the different widths. So you can fit 8 frames into an 8 frame hive versus you can fit an extra 2 frames, 10 frames into your 10 frame hive. Flow hives are very similar to Langstroth hives, and they are actually compatible with Langstroth hive equipment. The flow hive basically is an adaptation of your Langstroth hive honey super, which allows you to collect honey directly from your hive without disturbing the bees. It's definitely an interesting invention, and I haven't had the chance to play with this, unfortunately, but I do know a couple of people who are getting started, so I'll have some more information later on. And I may be able to point anyone who's interested to a couple of good resources. Top bar hives and horizontal hives are very similar in that they are horizontal, whereas your Langstroth is a very vertical hive. These hives are great for people who have trouble lifting because you're going to lift an individual frame instead of an entire box. The top bar hives are literally just top bars where the bees will freely draw their comb, whereas the horizontal hives have more of a Langstroth frame. They have a completely enclosed frame, and it's usually very deep. The Slovenian cabinet or AZ hive, I highly recommend that everybody checks this out on Google. There's some really amazing photos of some people who've worked really hard on these. Basically, you can have an entire house devoted to your bees. You can have a single hive devoted to your bees, but it looks a little bit like a Langstroth hive, but instead of opening it from the top, you open it from the back with a large door, and then you slide the frames out rather than lifting them. The German plastic hive is also an adaptation of your Langstroth hive, but it's made of plastic instead of wood. And going back to our history lesson previously, we were talking about the abundance of resource, the price of resources. German plastic hives have plastic instead of wood, and at this point I think they're actually becoming more economical, so I expect to see more of these in use in the future. They also have quite a bit more insulation than the wood hives. Michigan Beekeepers website. I'll need to check that out. Definitely sounds interesting. Hive placement. So hive placement is pretty important. Your bees are going to be relying on the sun to tell them when it's morning, when they can start foraging. And the bees rely on the sun as far as being a compass. You'll think of a mariner as finding the North Star. The bees do the same thing with the sun. That's how they know where they're going and where they're coming home. So it's really important that when you place your hive, you have your hive to the south or an eastern exposure so they get the most morning light possible. You also want to protect them from the wind. If you have a really windy area, but you really want that spot, maybe you can put a wind shield up, a big piece of wood, a fence section, something like that. But if you have too much wind on the entrance, your bees are going to have a really hard time entering and exiting the hive, and that's not going to wind up being a healthy environment for them. Considering how many hives you'll have also goes into your placement. Some people like to place their hives side by side. Maybe you have a pallet with 4 hives and you've got 2 hives facing one direction, 2 hives facing the other direction, both right next to each other. This definitely works. You may have some problems with drift where bees will go to the wrong hive by accident, but there are things that you can do to negate this. If you are really artistic, you can do little murals on your hives and the bees will recognize the colors and the shapes. They can't necessarily see red, so they'll just see kind of a dull gray color. So maybe you want to consider that. If you're not an artist and you want them to, you don't want them to drift, maybe just do a dotted line or a couple of squares or some sort of a pattern next to your entrance so your bees know which hive is theirs. High traffic areas. A lot of people keep bees in very small places. I've seen a couple of hives actually in a yard that was probably about 15 by 15 feet. So we're talking tiny, tiny areas here. As long as the entrance has about 6 feet from high traffic areas, six open feet so the bees can come out of their hive, they can fly straight for a minute and then hop over whatever obstacle they're looking at. That's totally fine. You're not really going to have a large stream of bees 8 or 10 feet from the hive typically. Especially in small circumstances like this, small yards, highly urbanized areas, it's a good idea to talk to your neighbors and just be open. Maybe not necessarily bother them with all of your beekeeping knowledge, but if they have questions, let them know that you can field those questions. You're there for them. If they have any concerns, knowledge and just open communication seems to be the best thing you can do. And if someone's a little bit worried, you can always give them a jar of honey too. That seems to help. As far as local laws, definitely take a look at local laws in your area. In Corvallis, Philomath, and Albany, the only laws that really affect beekeeping are nuisance laws. So it's the same concept with your neighbors being really loud. There aren't any laws prohibiting the use of beekeeping here. I think in Albany recently, they want you to report if you have more than 4 hives, but I would need to double check on that just to be sure. Brief point on building and painting your hives. Painting your hives or finishing your hives or doing something to prevent water from getting to the wood is highly recommended. You don't have to paint your hive boxes, but considering that they're the cheapest material we can get, they're pine, they're probably only going to last 3 or 4 years if they're completely unpainted and unfinished. So you can use linseed oil, you can use a low VOC paint of whatever light color you'd like. Try to avoid red or black, which bees can't see or will be too hot during the summer. You want to get them painted, finished, sealed, whatever you're doing with them, at least a month before the bees arrive so that there are no fumes around. Okay, so Langstroth hive composition and terminology. We're going to be going over this for a couple of minutes here, so I just wanted to take a quick break. And if you have any questions so far, feel free to unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to field any questions.
Hi, I have a question. I have a beehive that I just got. It's actually still in the box. And so I have a lot of work to do there. But I didn't know, when does bee season start? When should we be getting the bees? And we still have time to build it, to paint it and position it before we get the bees for this season. Is that correct?
That's a great question. You definitely have time. Bee pre-orders at Shonnard's typically start in January, so they are live right now. We'll be taking orders until probably early April. The bees won't be arriving until late April and into May, depending on if you get a package or a nucleus hive. So you definitely have time to set everything up still.
Great. And then one last question. You had kind of touched on paint. But do you have to use a certain kind of paint that doesn't harm the bees? Or is there a certain kind that you recommend? I heard you say like linseed oil, but I kind of missed that. Sorry.
So you can use a linseed oil. My mentor, Fred Selby, he likes to use Thompson wood seal, gives it a really nice natural finish. You can use beeswax actually to seal it off as well, which is kind of interesting. But if you're using a paint, I use a low VOC exterior latex paint. And you can have that in any color. Pastels are definitely best. I have mine as kind of a light blue right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And just another quick thing on painting. Just paint anything on the outside that you can physically see. Don't paint anything where the bees are going to be inside the hive. They're not going to like that, and they really prefer just the fresh raw wood. So you don't need to finish or seal or anything, your frames or anything, just the outside of the box, anything that would be touched by rain. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Do you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. So I have 2 hives, and then I've been working with a woman who has, well, she had 4 this last summer, and we went into, she lost all of her hives, unfortunately. I kind of felt that they probably didn't get enough of a start during the summer, but we went on a little warm spell that we had this last winter. We went into one of her hives, and she had probably maybe 100 workers, but the queen was still alive. What would you recommend on doing something with something like that situation?
So if you still have some remaining bees and a functioning queen, the best thing you can do is to supplement, if you want to keep that particular hive going, you can supplement it with frames from a different hive that is a strong hive. Put capped brood in there, put fresh brood in there, get as much of a population going as possible. You could potentially...
It was winter time. It was winter time, so we didn't have anything. So
sorry. During winter, that's a really tough situation. Unfortunately, there's really not terribly much you can do at that point. Particularly because you can't really get into the hive to do much work when it's that cold out. You really need to have it be 50, 55 degrees to do any kind of a work in the hive. So unfortunately, at that point, there's really not terribly much you can do.
okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Right, I think I'm going to get started with the hive composition and terminology. The bullet points I have here are set up from the top of your hive going all the way down. So this is just kind of basically what you're going to be seeing as far as vocabulary for what pieces of the hive you're looking at. And while I'm talking about this, I'm going to be dealing with 10 frame exclusively just to make things simple. If you have questions about 8 frame, I'll be happy to answer those as well, and I'll get into that a little bit later too. So the very top of your hive, the lid, is your telescoping top. Below your telescoping top, you're going to have potentially your feeder, depending on what feeder you have. Frame feeders and barrel feeders are a little bit different, but if your feeder is below your telescoping top, you probably have Vivaldi inner cover, which the feeder is inside. So these 2 bullet points would kind of go together in that case. You have, during summer, your honey super, which is the small box with the small frames. And being as though we're talking about 10 frame hive equipment here, you have 10 Western frames in your single honey super. Below your honey super, you have your QueenExcluder. This keeps the queen from going into your honey super and laying eggs in the honey that you're potentially wanting to spin out and to gather for yourself. Below your QueenExcluder, you're going to have your 2 deep brood boxes, and these boxes are the boxes for your bees. They're not the boxes for you. So you're going to have 20 deep frames in your 2 deep brood boxes. And this is going to be where your queen does all of her work. She's going to raise all of the new workers, all of the drones. They're going to be bringing lots of resources, pollen and nectar in as well. Below your brood boxes, you're going to have your screened bottom board. and your entrance reducer is going to be kind of in between those. The entrance reducer is a really small part that could be overlooked, but it's actually really important. It reduces the entrance so that robbers aren't as much of a problem. Your bees can easily defend the entrance. It'll also keep things a little bit warmer in winter. It won't be as drafty. The entrance reducer is really a necessary part of the beehive. Your hive stand, you can get really fancy with it, or you can do something a little bit simpler. I put my hive on cinder blocks, but you can use commercial stands that are adjustable. If you've got really uneven situation, you can use pallets. You can do all sorts of stuff for hive stands. People build their own typically. So these are completed hives before supering. These are just your brood boxes. And you'll notice that there's a different way of doing it. Your typical scenario is on the right, these two boxes here. It has 2 deep brood boxes, and this is the setup that the bees appreciate the best. They've got the most space to raise all of their babies on all the frames within these 2 big boxes. Again, you want to have your hive boxes fit you, the beekeeper. The bees will deal with just about any kind of scenario they're in. So on the left here, we have 3 Western brood boxes. The Western boxes are typically used as honey supers, but you can use them as brood boxes as well. Instead of your 2 brood boxes that are deep, you're going to be using 3 brood boxes that are Western. And this is just going to make things a lot easier on the beekeeper. It's a lot less weight to carry at once. So just briefly, this is the difference between your 8-frame and your 10-frame. They're essentially the same size box in all ways except the actual width here. You can fit 8 frames into your 8-frame equipment, and you can fit 10 frames into your 10-frame equipment. The 8-frame is much, much lighter weight. You're going to save probably 20 to 40 pounds having an 8-frame versus a 10-frame. So if you're not wanting to carry a ton of weight, I definitely recommend going with the 8-frame hive. But the 10-frame is standard. All of your commercial beekeepers are going to be using 10-frame equipment. If you move anywhere in the United States, 10-frame equipment is going to be the easiest to find. It's the most standard. So honey supers or Western boxes are on the top. These can be for resource collection for winter for your bees, or they can be for resource collection for your honey jars at the end of the year as well. The idea here is that there is honey in these boxes and there's not much else. There's all just going to be honey in these top boxes. As you'll see on the left, you've got a photo here, and this is partially capped honey, the white capping up here, and partially uncapped. And this is nectar that isn't quite ready yet. The bees will take nectar from flowers, and it's going to have a pretty high moisture content, and they'll beat their wings and they will basically dehydrate the water out of the nectar until it's a low enough point where it won't go bad and it becomes honey. So you're looking for about 13% moisture content here. On the bottom left side, you have a brood frame, which probably isn't the center brood frame. It's kind of one of the outside ones here. But this is a really, really beautiful frame, and this is what you're going to be looking for when you're doing your hive inspections. The center bit here, you'll notice, is mostly capped brood. This is brood that's getting ready to hatch, and there are a couple in here that have already hatched. This band on the outside, this orange band, is all pollen. So the bees here are having a great time. They've got lots of resources in here. They're really healthy. There's a lot of bees on this frame. Obviously, the beekeepers probably smoke the bees a little bit so you can see the frame beneath the bees. And then this band up here at the top is just a little bit of capped honey, and this is all what they're going to be using to feed themselves and to feed their brood. All right, so the bullet points, we went from the top to the bottom. Now we're going to go from the bottom to the top as we build our hive. This may be a little redundant for some, but for our beginner beekeepers, I just want to make sure that you know what everything's called and basically just the setup of your hive. So after your hive stand is set up, you're ready to actually build your hive. Your screened bottom board is the very first part here. If you'll notice at the bottom, this is where your entrance is going to be. This is where your bees are going to get into and out of your hive. It also has a little slit at the back, and you can insert a mite board here. So you can essentially make this a solid bottom board with your mite board during winter when it's really, really cold out. Like I would have my mite board in right now. You can also leave your mite board out during the summertime, get some extra ventilation in there. During summertime, it's really nice to have a little bit of extra airflow when it's really hot out. So starting right above your screen bottom board, we're talking about our brood boxes. And brood boxes aren't necessarily always going to be 2 brood boxes, a honey super. You're going to start out when you first get your bees with just a single brood box. If you have Western hive setup instead of deep hive setup, typical setup, you're going to have your deep brood boxes. But if you want to do all Westerns, I would start out with 2 Western boxes for 1 brood box. And I would start out with 1 deep brood box if you're going to go the deep brood box method here. When your bees have begun filling out all of the frames in this box, let's say you have probably 2 to 3 frames on the outskirts of your box that are empty, that don't have any resources in them, but everything else has brood and honey and nectar and is full of bees, you want to add that second box. You don't ever want them to run out of room, because if they run out of room, there's a pretty good chance during spring that they will swarm, and you'd like to avoid that and keep your bees in your hive. Your queen excluder, you can go metal or plastic queen excluder, but this goes on top of your brood boxes. And in this photo, we're going the Western brood box scenario. So three Western brood boxes here. You would put your queen excluder right on top of your brood area, so that when you add your honey super, your queen cannot get through. Your workers can fly through this pretty easily, but your queen is too big to fit through these little holes, and she won't go up and lay eggs and larvae into your honey super. So a common question that I get is, when do you add your supers? When is it time? When do you get your honey versus what honey they're getting? You want your brood boxes to be about 70% full. So that's both brood boxes in your deep scenario, or all 3 brood boxes in your Western scenario. When they're about 70% full, they have a ton of resources in there already. They're completely, they're sustaining themselves at this point. You would add your honey super on. Typically speaking, the honey flow begins when the blackberries begin to bloom. So sometime in June, July, that's when your honey box is going to go on, and you're going to have them start filling it up. Sometimes you have a really good year. There's lots of flowers. There's lots of bee activity. You've got a huge colony. You may add 2 or 3 supers in a really good year. If there's not much blooming, maybe you have a weak colony, maybe you would have 1 honey super, or you wouldn't even get strong enough to do a honey super. But you really got to take a look at the population in your colony and the availability of flowers, and then the resources coming into your hive to really know when it's time to put that honey super on. The Vivaldi inner cover. This can be used in place of a standard inner cover. A lot of people have the standard inner cover, which instead of this deep box here is just a little piece of board that works just fine, and it serves the purpose of making sure the telescoping top, your cover, doesn't stick to the rest of your hive setup. Makes it a real bear if you forget to put your inner cover on and you try and get that telescoping top off. Takes forever, upsets the bees. Just make sure you've got some sort of a buffer between your lid and your boxes. And this is what this functions as. Your Vivaldi inner cover, I prefer over your standard inner cover because it has a lot of functionality. It's not just for your feeder, although it does hold a substantial amount of sugar water, and I do prefer this feeder method. It provides extra ventilation. It's got 4 holes on the side, as you can see. The bees can hang out up in there if they prefer, but you're really not going to see too much burr comb being built up here. I've seen it once or twice, but it's pretty uncommon. You can also use this cover during winter to add extra insulating materials, extra water wicking materials. Some people will fill it up with burlap or a beach towel or just something to absorb water during winter. When the bees are making a lot of moisture, there's a lot of moisture outside, you're trying to keep moisture off of the bees during winter. And your telescoping top. I mentioned this briefly before. It goes on top of your inner cover or your Vivaldi inner cover. There are a lot of telescoping tops out there. They are not all equal. The two I have in the bottom photos here are excellent telescoping tops. I'd recommend either one of them. The copper top is mostly pretty, whereas the one in the top picture here is purely functional. So there's definitely a difference in price there, but they serve the same function. They're both really great tops. You want to be careful about tops that don't completely cover the outside of the hive. If you look in the photo with the green hive here, this is coming completely around the hive. Some of them only have the top and the back actually overlapping, and then they'll have just a flush piece of wood on top, which will allow a little bit of air to flow through, which will allow rain to get in. You want to avoid those. If you do have something like that, make sure to add just a piece of scrap wood or something to the top with a rock on top of it to prevent any moisture from getting in. All right, so now that we've talked about the exterior of the hive, your deep boxes, your western boxes, let's get into frames. There are a couple different sizes you'll need to think about. Your deep hive boxes are going to need deep frames. Your western hive boxes are going to need western frames. How many frames do I need? Consider, do you have a 10-frame hive or an 8-frame hive? An 8-frame hive box, again, you have 8 frames that will fit into a box. A 10-frame hive configuration, you're going to have 10 frames that fit into a box. So do the math on that, and that's pretty easy there. Bee space. This is what L.L. Langstroth is known for. He basically figured out exactly how much space is required to make a removable frame, actually removable, to prevent the bees from drawing a bunch of burr comb around it and gluing it essentially to the hive and making it a non-removable frame. So 3/8 of an inch is going to separate your frames from the hive wall and from the bottom. The top bars from your inner cover, the top bars from the bottom, like I said again. So you really need that extra hive space so you don't have burr comb flying everywhere. You don't have to do a lot of comb destruction to get into your hive and do your inspections. Bees don't necessarily read our books, and sometimes this doesn't work out properly. As you can see in the picture up here, we've got bees that have drawn comb instead of along your frame, kind of outward of your frame, and that this is really inefficient. They've gotten a little confused here. I was actually in this hive, I took this photo, and the beekeeper was doing everything right. The bees were just being weird. They do that sometimes, it's unavoidable, but it's pretty cool when you see it. So in a scenario like this, I would take my hive tool and I would scrape away all of this comb and let them just completely redraw it. The likelihood that they'll draw it the same incorrect way when it's a clean frame is pretty low. So you don't want them drawing like this. You're going to cause a lot of comb destruction if you see this kind of activity in your hive. All right, so foundation. There are a couple different things you can think about as far as foundation. When you're building your own frames, you can think about real wax, which is kind of cool, but I wouldn't recommend it for beginners. It's all natural, but it is incredibly fragile and usually requires wiring. You can use an extractor with this frame type, but the likelihood that you will destroy the comb is definitely a possibility. So I wouldn't recommend this in extractors. If you're going to extract honey from a real wax frame, I would probably do a gravity drain, which takes a lot longer, but is still effective, and you can keep your frame afterwards. Foundationless is wonderful. I really enjoy letting my bees draw their own frames. If you see in the bottom right picture here, this is a foundationless frame where the bees have just kind of done their own thing. They've drawn it out beautifully. This isn't always the case, especially if you have multiple frames in your box side by side that are undrawn. They may draw it completely incorrectly and have comb going the wrong direction, which could be a huge mess. So if you're going to do some foundationless beekeeping, maybe have foundations on either side of your foundationless and just kind of play around with it and see what you find. I typically go with the right cell plastic foundation. The nice thing about this is it's basically going to last you forever. If you have improper drawing of wax, you've got some really lumpy stuff, you've got the wrong size cells, whatever you want to get rid of the comb, you take your hive tool, you scrape all the wax off, you still have your plastic foundation below, and you can use that frame over and over again. That being said, drawn comb can be used over and over again to a point. They'll probably last 3-4 years before they become really dark and kind of nasty. Dark comb isn't too much to worry about because it's usually just brood comb, but after a while, the bees aren't really going to want to use it anymore. When we are talking about real wax foundation, you're typically going to find them in a box, kind of like the photo on the top left here. And it's going to require some assembly. So I've got a link here to our tutorial on frame wiring. I'm not going to spend too much time here because most people tend to go the right cell route. But if you have questions, you can email me after class at bees@shonnards.com. Beekeeping equipment. So there are certain things that you can't live without, and there are also a lot of pretty accessories that people like. The thing that you absolutely cannot live without is a hive tool. You have to have a hive tool or something like it, some sort of a pry bar. Some people have a hook on their pry bar so they can easily lift the frames. This hive tool is my favorite. As you can tell, it's well used. But you use this for everything. You use it for popping your boxes apart when it's been propolized shut. You use it for lifting your frames out of your boxes. Just any number of things. Scraping frames with improperly drawn wax. This is your best friend in your apiary. Your smoker is really important. A lot of people these days don't want to necessarily use smoke on their bees, but it's great to have it as a reserve. This doesn't necessarily just protect the beekeeper, it also protects the bees. As you can tell, pretty well used. These last a really, really long time. This one has a nice leather bellows on it as well. But the smoke is doing a couple of things. It is keeping the bees calm. They are going to think maybe there's a natural phenomenon going on instead of, say, a bear coming in to attack the hive. They are going to be smelling the smoke, and you can only smell one thing at one time. So the spread of alarm pheromones is not going to be spread when there's smoke in the way instead. So it's less likely that you're going to rile the bees up if you've got a little bit of smoke in the air. You don't need a ton of smoke. You don't need to smoke yourself out or the bees out completely. Just enough that they can kind of get a whiff of it is really all you need most of the time. It is an excellent tool for moving your bees. When you're putting your hive back together again, do some concentrated puffs around the edges of your box, and you'll get the bees to go away from the area where you puffed and go back into the frames. So you're going to avoid crushing a lot of bees that way. I prefer using smoke to move the bees than any kind of a brush. I find the brush can be a little violent. They really don't like being brushed. They prefer smoke, in my experience. As far as PPE, I highly recommend for any beginners, anyone who's even slightly nervous, just get a full suit, gloves, nice boots, get the whole setup. And the more comfortable you are around your bees, the more comfortable your bees are going to be. And then that's going to really help you with your confidence. If you don't mind a sting or two, if you are really comfortable around your bees, maybe you don't need a full set of PPE, but no matter what you do, I always recommend at least having a veil on. It's no fun to be stung in the nose. I can tell you firsthand. Social organization. This is kind of a fun topic and I could probably go on for a couple of hours. So I'm going to try to keep this short. Your basic caste system, you're going to have one queen in your hive at any given time. There are exceptions to this, and it's really interesting, but that's for another time. The majority of bees in your hive are going to be workers. The queen and the worker bees are all female. And then there's going to be your drone, which is the only male bee in your hive. There are periods where you will see no drones at all, particularly in late fall, winter, and early spring. And there are times where there's going to be up to probably 10% of your population being drones. Drones don't have much functionality in their own hive. They are for the benefit of other hives. So essentially your drones are kind of helpless. They can't really feed themselves. They're treated basically like larvae by your worker bees. They are fed, they are watered. They go out and they look around for queens, and that's their daily activity. Which is part of the reason why their eyes look so much different. They have upward facing eyes because they're constantly in search of queens, which will be flying above them. Your worker bee does everything. It is aptly named. The worker bees collect nectar, they collect pollen. That's typically what most people think that they do, but they have so much more that they do. And depending on their life stages and their ages, they're going to be doing different things. When a worker bee first emerges, they're going to be housekeeping bees. They're going to be feeding fellow larvae. They're going to be playing mortuary. They're going to be removing dead bees from the colony. They're not really going to be outside of the hive much when they're young. So there's a lot of different things that the worker bee is going to do before they eventually become a foraging bee, which they'll usually be a foraging bee the rest of their lives once they begin that kind of work. And the queen, of course, only has one purpose, really. She has workers who feed her, workers who obey her every pheromone response and spread her pheromone throughout the hive so that everybody knows the queen is still around. But her main function is simply to lay eggs. She mates once in her life, and once she is full of sperm, she will go into the hive and lay up to probably around 2,000 eggs a day. So bees develop inside cells, but you can definitely tell which bee is developing where, just based on a quick visual inspection. You have worker brood on the left and drone brood on the right. Drones are significantly larger than workers, and they're going to be kind of pushed out. Their cappings aren't going to be smooth. They're going to kind of look odd and imperfect. A lot of beekeepers will actually scrape their drone brood out if they have too much of it. Reason being, they take longer to develop. Once a cell is drone brood size, which is larger than your worker cell, it will always be a drone brood cell. And because of their longer cycles inside the cells, they are more of the breeders of mites. So the more drone you have, the more mite potential you have in your hive as well. So getting rid of some of your drone brood is a good idea. Bee breeds. am assuming a lot of you are really interested in this bit, so I will try and take some time to go over the breeds here. We have, again, until probably mid-April to order your packages in your nucleus hives. So this is something to consider. The Italian breed is the most common breed in the United States. It's used commercially. Just about every commercial beekeeper uses these bees. They are really large colonies, pretty robust. They're gentle. They don't do a whole lot of propolizing, so it's really easy to do hive inspections very quickly. They have high comb building, so they may build excess burr comb, but burr comb is typically easier to deal with than extra propolis. They are moderately hygienic, so they handle some diseases pretty well. They unfortunately have a high drift, which is going to increase mite problems. So if you have Italians, maybe make sure to paint your hives and make sure they know where home is. The Carniolan is my favorite breed of bee. They have almost full-on black queens, beautiful, beautiful queens. They're originally from Slovenia and Austria, which is a little further north than where the Italian bees are coming from in the boot of Italy. They are more used to that climate, which is pretty close to our climate here in Oregon. So they're going to forage earlier in the day. They're going to come home later in the day. They're going to forage on wetter days than most breeds, including the Italians. So in Oregon, I think this is definitely a benefit. I really love this breed here. They are quick to build up in spring, particularly if you're feeding them, because broodrearing is dependent on available resources, available pollen, available nectar. So they're less likely to starve. They're going to control their population. If there's a lack of resources, they're going to slow down their brood rearing. They are pretty hygienic. They don't have much trouble with brood diseases. So if you're worried about a chalk brood or a foul brood or something like that, this may be something you could go with. They don't have much robbing instinct. They will still rob, don't get me wrong, but they have less robbing instinct than your Italians, which could be more aggressive to a weaker colony. They're also less likely to build as much burr comb. Notice I didn't say anything about propolizing. They're still going to propolize plenty, and you're really, really going to have to use your hive tool to get your boxes apart. So something to consider, but all bees will build burr comb and all bees will propolize. So you're not going to be able to get rid of those things altogether. These bee breeds we're only selling in nucleus hives. So if you're doing package bees, this is kind of out of the question unless you find a different vendor. But these are nucleus hives coming from Old Soul apiaries. The Caucasian is a specialty variety. It's kind of related to the Russian bee. They're darker bees, kind of black and silver. They're originally from the Central Caucasus near the Black Sea. So when you're talking like rhododendron honey and things like that, they may have been this breed here. They have the longest tongue out of any of the bee breeds, which is kind of interesting. They can forage a larger variety of flowers. So if you're looking for a variety, this could be what you're looking for here. They are gentle, but like the Russian bees, once they're provoked, it's difficult to calm them. So that's something to consider. Slow and steady wins the race with any bee variety, but particularly with the Caucasians here. They have a low swarming instinct, which is really nice. If you miss a hive inspection here or there, maybe it's not going to be the end of the world. Any bee will still swarm. It's a natural phenomenon and it's healthy for the bee colony. But typically, from an animal husbandry point of view, we don't really want them to swarm. We want to keep our bees in our boxes. They are used to this type of climate like the Carniolans, so they'll forage early in the day and later into the evening. The standard survivor, I would recommend you going to Old Soul's website and checking out the descriptions that they have for these bees, but they are basically the mutt of bees. And I know all you dog lovers out there, all the best dogs are mutts. So this could be something that you're looking at here. They're typically bred for certain characteristics. They're bred for hygiene, The more they clean, the less problems they're going to have with fungal diseases and mites and things like that. They have low propolising habits and high populations, also a low swarming instinct like your Caucasian. Basically, all of these bees are great to choose from. Mixing and matching is definitely an option. If you have 2 or 3 hives, I'd recommend trying 2 or 3 breeds, seeing which works best for you. Maybe you live on the top of a hill or in a valley, or you live next to an orchard, and one of these breeds is going to do better than the other. You really don't know until you try it because there are so many variables out there. So definitely do a little bit of experimentation and see what works best for you. As far as procuring bees, package bees can be a little intimidating to new beekeepers. This is basically an artificial swarm. They are pretty gentle in this state. They have no brood to protect. They have a queen, but they also have no resources. They have no food other than the tin can that is actually in the middle here, but you can't see. So they're not in defensive mode particularly. They're just looking for a new home. They arrive about a month earlier than nukes. So if you're really itching to get started and you feel comfortable shaking a box of bees into your hive, then this may be the way to go for you. It's good to have drawn comb for your package bees so they can immediately begin storing resources, but it's not a necessity. I actually started my very first colony with a package with no drawn comb whatsoever. I kept their food full the entire time they were building, and they did just fine. It's really beautiful to see freshly drawn comb. So if you have maybe just an empty frame, pop it in instead of one of your drawn combs that you've been gifted or something like that, and really just check out the brand new wax. It really is a beautiful thing to see. Package bees are typically easier to treat than nucleus hives as well, as far as treating for varroa mites. Because there's no brood, you have a lot more options as far as medicines. Typically with a package, I would use Apiguard because you can get away with it, and later in the season, you're going to be forced to go into different methods that will actually get through your wax cappings and into the sealed brood. Nukes, nucleus hive. This is basically the heart of a full-on hive. It's a miniature portable hive. So this is wonderful for beginners. It's super, super easy to transfer. All you're doing basically is you're taking 5 frames out of your already built hive. You're setting those aside, and then you're putting the 5 frames that you're getting in your nucleus box into your hive, and you're done. That's as simple as it gets. Your nuke box is going to have 5 frames within. Like I said, they are all fully drawn. You have a small colony in your nuke box, complete with a mated and laying queen. Those drawn frames are going to have resources like honey and pollen. They're going to have capped and uncapped brood. So really it is a miniature functional hive. And it's a wonderful start because you've got those drawn combs. You are immediately having your bees bring resources in rather than having to build so much more before you really get started. Swarms. If you're a brand new beekeeper, maybe try something as far as your nucleus hive first, but you can just jump straight into capturing a swarm. Like I said, the package is an artificial swarm. If you capture a swarm in the wild, they're free bees. You don't have to pay for them. All you have to do is actually be available, know when the call is coming in, immediately go out there and gather the bees up. It's as simple as getting the queen into the box and then waiting for a couple of minutes, and all the rest of the bees are going to follow the queen. Different swarms are going to have different levels of difficulty as far as procuring them. Sometimes it's as easy as they're on a branch. You cut the branch, put the whole branch in the box, and there you go. Sometimes they're going to be in somebody's barn and somebody's wall, and these are things that you should probably leave to the professionals. So know what you're getting into before you go out to grab a swarm. But I know there are several phone trees that can be set up. Check in with your OSU extension program, check in with Linn Benton Beekeepers Association, and you could be put onto a phone tree for gathering a swarm this year. As far as grabbing the bees and equipment you will need, you'll definitely need your PPE, you'll need your smoker, hive tool. I recommend bringing a bee brush as well. Loppers and pruners, if you're grabbing something off of a branch, lots of patience is required too. But it's really a cool thing watching all of the bees figure out that their queen is in the box and heading into the box as well. If you bring a couple of frames, drawn or undrawn, they're going to be attracted to the scent of the beeswax as well, so that can help. Regular hive maintenance, I'm going to have an entirely new class on this probably in the next month or two. So this is kind of a brief overview right here, kind of a precursor to the upcoming class. Once you've got your hive set up, your bees are safely inside, and the temperatures have risen to the point where it's consistently 50 to 55 degrees at least. You can begin your bi-weekly hive inspections. It's very important that you do your hive inspections once every 14 days specifically, because this means you're not getting into the hives too often, for one. If you get into the hives too often, you disturb the bees too much, you could cause them to swarm. You're also getting in there often enough to prevent swarming. So it's a fine line here. It takes a queen about 16 days to completely emerge. And at that point, it would be too late. So we want you to check on them every 14 days. So if you miss one somewhere in there, you'll catch the queen before she emerges and before a swarm happens. As far as feeding, the moment you get your bees into your box, whether it is a nucleus hive or a package, you're going to need to start feeding immediately. In early spring, when you first get your bees, you're going to want a ratio of 1 part sugar to 1 part water, and you want to feed them as often as possible. So the 1-to-1 sugar water syrup is going to simulate a light nectar flow. It's going to alert the bees that winter is coming to a close. It's time to up brood production. It's time to up wax production. It's time to really start going again. You're going to want to feed protein as well. You can see a protein patty in this top photo here. And this is exactly how you put it down. You leave the paper on, the bees are going to take care of the paper for you. Just kind of smash it onto the frames here and get it as close to the brood area as possible. Notice you've got an entirely new box right down here. This box goes on top of your protein patty because your brood area is going to be centered along these middle frames in the bottom box. So the protein patties are what really stimulates your queen to lay. Your queen can't lay eggs without protein. So these are really important to keep on. I typically have my protein patties available to my bees until they stop consuming them, which they would prefer natural protein to artificial pollen. Typically I'll feed up until around June or July, and then I'll have just a little bit in there just to see how much they'll eat, if any. But you never want them to run out of protein during the year. So we are coming to a close here. I'd like to invite you to check out a bunch of different resources. You don't have to just use my resources. Maybe you have a favorite website, a favorite person to go to. The more resources you find, the greater variety of knowledge you find, the more you will be comfortable with your own style of beekeeping. So you can check out our website, shonnards.com. We've got a bunch of written tutorials down here. Honeybee Health Coalition talks a lot about varroa management, when you should treat your hive. It has just a management tool where you can put in information about your hive and it'll tell you kind of what you should be doing as far as varroa management. You can always look at this class or other beekeeping classes or video shorts on our YouTube page as well. And as far as books, personally, I love the books because it's set in stone. Nobody's going to edit something the next day and turn around and completely mess with your information. The books are solid. They're physical. You can take them out and read them in the sun. But I'm kind of a nerd anyway, so highly recommend the Beekeeper's Handbook. This is a really great book for the money, and OSU actually uses it as their textbook. So it's got some really great information in there, awesome diagrams. Highly recommend it to just about any beekeeper. The Backyard Beekeeper is really nice because it has full color photos. For those of you who are more visually inclined with your learning, this may be an excellent book for you. It also goes over some top bar beekeeping. So if you have a top bar and you'd like to learn more there, the Backyard Beekeeper does go over this type of beekeeping as well. Garden Plants for Honeybees by Peter Linter. This is a really interesting book because not only does it have full color photos of different plants, scientific names, and a 5-star rating of nectar content versus pollen content, it also has a really nice organization system. It is organized into chapters by month. And so you can flip to what's blooming in February and really see what you can plant around your house that is going to benefit your bees. Or maybe it's June and you want to know what has the best pollen content, the best nectar content of everything that's blooming in your yard. This is an excellent resource for things like that. The Hive and the Honeybee. This is a book originally written by the Reverend Langstroth himself, and it has been updated and had a whole bunch of different authors come in over the years who are just incredible beekeepers and very, very specialized. So if you are an experienced beekeeper, a beginning beekeeper, you want some really specific knowledge, the Hive and the Honeybee is a wonderful resource. But the Hive and the Honeybee and Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping are both a little spendy. Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping is by Dewey Caron and Lawrence John Connor. They're both huge in the beekeeping community. And I highly recommend this book as well. All right, so I want to give a big thank you to everyone. We've had some excellent questions, and I think I'm going to go ahead and open up chat and offer everyone to unmute themselves for any additional questions at this time too.
I had a question. I was just wondering, when you're single brood box and you're reusing your honeycomb, is it hard to determine that 70% is used? So you need to add another box, or is that really going to be quite evident?
Usually it's actually pretty easy to tell. The bees are going to start in the middle of the box and they're going to work their way out to out of the box. So in a 10 frame hive, you're going to have 30% be 3 empty frames. So you have 2 empty frames on the side and maybe a half an empty frame on frame 2. So the outskirts of your box are going to be empty and the middle is going to be full.
Gotcha. And a 8 frame, just do the math.
Yep.
For 70.
Typically speaking, the 2 frames on the side should still be more or less empty. And then everything else in the middle is going to be full of resources and brood.
So the 2 outside would just have the old untouched comb pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good idea to rotate these every now and then. You don't want frames that are just never used because the bees are less likely to use them in the future. Don't ever disturb your brood area, but you can swap a resource frame with that empty frame and just kind of rotate them a little bit so they continue to be used.
Gotcha. And the brood area normally stays in the bottom box in the center. Is that correct?
Not necessarily in the bottom box, but it does normally stay in the center. Throughout the year, you're going to start with your bees being in the bottom box, and they're going to slowly move upwards. So in the fall, right before winter, you're going to swap your boxes so that they'll be in the bottom box again, and they can continue moving up.
Oh, thank you. Just one other quick question. Does the sugar water ever go rancid? Do you have to clean that before you add more?
Yeah.
I've never had a case where the sugar water actually goes rancid. Typically speaking, the bees are going to consume it much too quickly, particularly in the early spring when you're feeding with an 8 frame, probably a half a gallon at a time, or a 10 frame, a gallon at a time. they're going to consume that within the 2 weeks before you can fill it up again easily.
Okay, thank you.
Also bee patties.
Scroll up in the chat window here. It looks like I got a little bit behind. So let's see if I can catch up here. Yes, I need to post about the local bee communities. So let me take it out of screen share real fast. I had this in my clipboard, but for some reason it has taken me out of it. Back into chat. So right here, I've got a couple of resources here for you. This is the YouTube channel where the video is going to be posted, the tutorial on frame wiring for anyone who's interested, and then the bottom two here, the Honeybee Health Coalition. The Linn Benton Beekeepers Association is a really awesome local club. They hold monthly Zoom meetings. They've got a lot of different resources available to them. And I definitely recommend checking them out. Or you can go to OSU, check out their website and go to the Master Beekeepers page, and you'll find quite a bit of information there as well. See, looks like Pierre was curious about the German plastic hives. The insulation is insulation a good thing in a colder climate? I've only actually seen one German plastic hive in the Corvallis area. It's definitely a little different and it takes some getting used to, but I think the extra insulation is beneficial. I want to know what happens during the summer. I feel like it's not going to get as hot, but I could be wrong there.
We used one this last summer.
What did you think of it?
I wasn't overly impressed, but my friend went out and bought it. They're pricey though. That's it. They're like almost $500. Yeah.
I would be hoping that it would be cheaper at least.
Yeah, but I think it did keep them warmer during the winter, but I'm not so sure that matters so much. I think moisture is such a big problem here, other than the warmth.
Lengthy. Did she do something?
I would also be a little concerned about the plastic deteriorating in the sun. Did you see any of that?
Dodo, get in there. Get up. Get up.
I had a question about splitting a hive. Since I lost one of my hives, I wanted, and it's full. It still has honey and stuff in it, but I was wondering about splitting it and when I should do that.
So you want to split your hives when they are at peak population, when they have lots of resources, lots of pollen, lots of nectar, lots of population. You need ideally to have a minimum of 5 solid frames of bees to have a healthy population. And that's basically what your nuke is 5 frames full of bees. So if you have 10 full frames full of bees, that's the absolute smallest point where you can make a split.
Okay.
Did you have questions about how to do the split or just when to do it?
When to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want the temperatures to be nice too, but typically the temperatures are going to be fine if you're having the populations you're looking for.
Yeah. One other question I have is I noticed on your hives you have a small hole. I don't have any of that on my hives. Is that just like a little alternative exit for them?
Yes, it's not 100% necessary. Some people will have them, some people won't, but it provides just an extra entrance. This is particularly helpful when you put your honey super on and you don't have them filling it up quite yet. It will encourage your bees to fill the honey super up if they don't have to go to the bottom box and go all the way up to the top.
Okay.
Let's see, checking out the chat window. Feel free to ask away. I'm just looking for additional questions in chat here. Looks like I had a couple questions about contact information. You can see the contact information on the current slide. Always email me at bees@shonnards.com. I check my email every day, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that come my way. You can also pop into the nursery itself, and I know a lot of you have spoken to me in the bee department, and it's kind of hard to get away from me, so I do like to talk. Just let me know if you're on a schedule, and I'll try and keep it short for you, but I do really enjoy basically just giving whole presentations to anyone who will hear me. So
Can I ask another question?
of course.
My wife is just concerned about the protein, the pollen. With the bee packages, we add that right away, I guess, to the brood box, and they'll consume that. We may have to add more. Do you have to, does that ever go bad, or do you ever have to clean that out when they get rolling, or do the bees just take care of all that?
Whenever I add a new protein patty, if there's a little bit left, usually it's kind of soggy, mushy, I'll just take my Hive tool, and I have a container out with me for burr comb or whatever refuse that I have in my hive that I need to get out of my hive. Just scrape the remaining protein and put it into that waste compartment.
Okay, gotcha.
I feed it to the chickens.
Yep,
Yeah.
The chickens will probably love it. The chickens tend to love just about anything out of the beehive.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Tony mentioned a little while ago, it looks like Bee Culture and American Beekeeping journals are really, really great magazines. I get the American Beekeeping Journal myself, and it really is an excellent resource. It's got really influential people writing in it. It's up to date, which is nice. They're just really great things to just read. I have 2 or 3 speakers that I'm constantly reading, and it doesn't take too long to read through them. So it's probably a week out of the month where I'm really, really excited about it. Let's see. Ooh, podcasts. Thank you, Tony. I don't have much experience with any of the beekeeping podcasts, but I have heard that there are a couple of really notable ones out there, including the pollination one from OSU. So definitely check those out as well. I need to get on it myself. There are resources everywhere, so I appreciate anyone who can recommend a resource to me or to others. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, I would recommend listening to them. Like you said, with they're pretty timely, a lot of their information. And there's Jamie Ellis from University of Florida, Kim Flottam from Bee Culture has one, and then Kim and Jim too have another one, and there's other ones out there, and you know, they're great to listen to. You can sit and pretty much nod off to them sometimes, but I want to say this was a great talk. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I'm a pretty experienced beekeeper from New York, and I've always enjoyed the presentations that you guys do. I find them very informative, and you're all personable, and you really do a good job. So I want to thank you for making my day, especially now with the way the weather is. You know, we're expecting a big snowstorm again, and we barely have climbed out of 30-degree weather. So our beekeeping won't start, in earnest for a month or so. So.
Waterfalls freezing over here in Oregon right now, so we're in the middle of a pretty hard cold snap ourselves. But thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it. You've definitely made my day.
One thing I might add, which is your moisture barrier board during the winter time. I noticed that was a big help here this last year. I bought one from Shonnard's, and I thought that and the insulation was a big thing, keeping the moisture out of the bee. And I also didn't feed them the sugar water this year. So that made a big difference.
Feeding dry sugar during winter can definitely help. The moisture boards, I think I didn't really talk about during class because I was mostly focused on things you could put inside your Vivaldi board. There is also a moisture wicking fiber board that you can put on top of your Vivaldi inner cover. It absorbs quite a lot of water. It does require changing during winter. So if you get a warmer day, pop in, flip it over, allow it to absorb more moisture, or if you have a second board, swap it out, and that can really absorb a great amount of moisture. Thank you for reminding me there, and I'm glad it worked well for you. Do I have a date set for hive maintenance presentation? I don't have a date set quite yet. I'm expecting it to be probably sometime next month. And I do have my hive maintenance presentation from last year currently posted on Shonnard's YouTube page. So if you go to playlists and you go to either 2021 Zoom classes or the beekeeping series, you can find that class right there. Do we have any follow-up questions? I think we're going to go ahead and finish up for the night. I encourage anyone with any additional questions to give us a call, shoot me an email, pop into the nursery and just talk in person. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, and you've been a wonderful class. I really appreciate all of you, and I wish you the best of luck in the new beekeeping year. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great.